I will now take the sediment for this meeting of the Planning Committee, held on the 30th of April 2024. Councillor Alec Allison is present. Councillor Ralph Barker is not present. We have apologies from Councillor Arch Buchanan, and Councillor Julia Mars is attending as a substitute. Apologies from Councillor Ross Clark. The following members are present: Councillors Jerry Convery, Margaret Cowie, Maureen Devlin, Colin Dewar, Mary Donnelly. Apologies from Councillor Joe Fagan. Councillor Elise Frame is present. Apologies from Councillor Alistair Fulton. Councillor Shalene Handybod is present. Councillor Graham Horn is present. Councillor Ross Lambie is present. Councillor Martin Lennon is not present. I have apologies from Councillor Monique McAdams. Councillor Liz MacDonald is present. Following members are also present: Councillor David McLaughlin, Richard Nelson, Norman Ray, John Ross. I have apologies from Councillor Graham Scott. Councillor Bert Thompson is attending as a substitute. Councillor David Shearer is present. Councillor Helen Toner is not present, and Councillor David Watson is present. Thank you, and I'll now pass you back to the Chair for today's business.
Thank you. Before commencing today's business, I would ask members to note that agenda item number 6 for the erection of a neighbourhood centre development at land between Bystone Cottage and White Gables and Peel Road and Thornton Hall has been withdrawn at the request of the applicant. Can you please remove this from your today's papers? Agenda item number 1, any declarations of interest? If there are no any declaration of interest, agenda item number 2 is the minutes of the previous meeting. These are pages 5 to 12 and are submitted for approval as a correct record. Do we all agree?
Agreed.
Agreed, thank you. Agenda item number 3 is application P211590. It's pages 13 to 22 in your pack. It's erection of 14 dwellings with associated landscaping and roadworks at land at Newlands Dairy, East Kilbride. And I'll ask Fraser to present.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, this application relates to a site that is identified for housing in the adopted South Lanarkshire Local Development Plan, and it seeks consent for the erection of 14 dwellings. The application has been subject to previous proposals which recognise this zoning, but with regards to the current application, there are a number of technical details and information that has not been submitted, and as such it has not been possible to assess the potential impact of the application. The deficiencies relate to details on drainage, noise impact, sightlines, access, as well as the impact on biodiversity. And while the applicant has been contacted on a number of occasions to provide the remaining information, it remains outstanding. And as such, for the reasons set out in section 11 of the report, it is recommended that planning permission should be refused for application P211590.
Thank you, Fraser. I'll open up for any questions or comments, please. If there are no questions or comments, I think this is totally appropriate, Fraser, that they are not coming in to speak to us in planning, so therefore I go with the recommendation to refuse.
I'll second that, Chair.
All agreed? Agreed, thank you. Agenda item number 4 is pages 23 to 38 in your pack, application P212019, and it's a formation of vehicle access erection of 18 dwelling houses, associated landscape and infrastructure, and that's at Birkwood Estate, Lesmahago. Fraser?
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, this application relates to a site that sits to the south of Lesmahago, and it's been subject to a number of planning applications over a number of years, and these are summarised in section 4 of the report that's presented to members. The current application seeks to approve conditions that were included in application CL 160336, which itself was given consent for a 10-year period. The conditions relate to a number of factors, and following consultation and publicity, it is considered that the information submitted is acceptable and does not raise any issues that would bring it into conflict with the development plan. The conditions will allow the first phase of development to proceed, and this relates to 18 dwellings, as well as making provision for connections to future phases of works. 2 letters of objection were submitted, but along with the responses from consultees, it is considered that there are no overriding planning issues with this application, and that subject to the conditions referred to in pages 31 to 38, that planning consent should be granted.
Thank you, Fraser. I'll open up for any questions or comments, please. If there are no questions or comments, it gives me great pleasure to recommend that we grant this subject to conditions.
I'll second it, Chair.
All agreed? Agreed, thank you. Agenda item number 5 is pages 39 to 52, and that's application P220477. It's erection of a single-storey dwelling house with attic accommodation, and that's at land at West Sidewood Road in Carnwath.
Thanks, Chair. This application seeks consent for a dwelling house, which the applicant states will be used as a bed and breakfast in association with proposed equine accommodation for people travelling with horses. The site is located in the rural area between Carnwath and Auchengrey and is currently an open field, and following consultation, 17 letters of objection were submitted, raising issues outlined in section 7 of the report. When assessed against the development plan, it is considered that the site contravenes a number of local and national policies, and as such, while the principle of accommodation for people travelling with horses is acceptable, the inclusion of a permanent residential unit that is to be erected before the business commences or has proven to be viable leads to the conclusion that this development should be refused. Section 11 of the report outlines that the proposals are contrary to the policies in the National Planning Framework in relation to location, connectivity and rural housing. But in addition to this, it is noted that the proposal is contrary to the South Lanarkshire Local Development Plan and in particular policies 4 and GBRA 9, as it is an inappropriate form of development that does not seek to consolidate an existing building group. Furthermore, the proposals are contrary to policies GBRA 2 and GBRA 10, as the business use referred to has not been established and its viability has not been proven. As such, application P220477 is recommended for refusal.
Thank you, Fraser. I'll open up for any questions or comments, please. Councillor Alec Allison.
Thanks, Chair. I don't know what the words are. Some concern or lack of understanding as to the reasons here. We have been continually told that the type of development that's allowable in the rural area are ones that can only really take place there. This type of facility has to be in a rural area and even in a quiet rural area. It has had the support of, I believe, our business development officers, and I actually think from that there is sufficient scope for a business like this. So although you've highlighted a number of policies, I just don't see how they are saying that this is not an appropriate development in the rural area. If it's not in the rural area, where are you putting it? It's exactly the type of thing that we need out here.
Thanks, Councillor. No, I think we're saying here in terms of stables and the equine part of the business. I think that would be appropriate for this location. In saying that, though, we have had applications that have come to this committee within the last year that were actually approving stables and this type of facility within an urban location. But the issue that's at hand here is the fact that there is a permanent residential unit before the business is actually established. There are a number of other locations where the stables could be, but again, it comes down to this permanent residential unit, and if the business doesn't prove viable and the business fails, we will end up with a residential unit which is sitting in the middle of this field, which is contrary to a number of policies. So I think here it's not necessarily about the business use itself, it's actually more about this proposed residential unit that is predicated on the fact that there's this equine bed and breakfast business. The comment back that we got from our enterprise sustainability, our business support teams around it is, yes, there is a proposal here, and yes, there is a business that may grow and develop in due course, but I think there's even questions, as we've picked up here, about the viability of this business. And I think what that then brings us back to, we could end up with a permanent residential unit on this site.
Would it not then be possible to condition it that the stables have to be there first? Because it is the type of business where you need to have people on site. It is strange, it's bed and breakfast, it's not horses staying in their normal location. So therefore having people on site, I would think, is essential. If it's an overnight bed and breakfast for horses, where are the people who are transporting them going to be? So therefore you also need people for that. If you want this type of business, you have got to have the package as a whole.
Yeah, no, that would require a fresh application, effectively, to, you know, to put the stables first, to establish the business, to then prove the viability of the business. And if there then is a requirement for a permanent residential unit onto site, but the proposal we have just now is, it runs contrary to the policies that we have.
Sorry, Fraser, that wasn't the point I was making. It wasn't a case of build the stables, make sure the business is viable. It was make sure the stables are built before you start the house. So therefore, you're not going to have your residents there and no business starting. I do not think, as I said, it's a package as a whole.
You know, I suppose the issue with that is we couldn't, you know, like, control, and we don't have evidence to actually show that that business could be successful. That it's not proven to be viable. It's, in terms of the policy, it has to be viable businesses, and that's what the GBRA2 and GBRA10. It's about promoting, you know, viable businesses that then may need residential accommodation as part of it. This hasn't been provided in terms of the application that's submitted to us just now. The danger that we could have here is that this business fails, and then we've just got another, you know, it's a residential unit without any supporting business around this. So we haven't got enough information to prove that there's a viable business here, and that's what brings it into conflict with our own local development plan policies.
Thank you, Fraser. Councillor David McLaughlin online, please.
Thank you, Chair. Dare I say it's like the cart before the horse here. Pardon the pun. It's you know, the facilities that have been suggested here would be appropriate, and I agree with what Councillor Alison is saying, because it's in the rural area, and where else would you have that? But the way that Fraser described it to us, and it's in the report, there is no sign of any development that would suggest that this would be ancillary to that type of business. So it is a classic example of trying to, be careful with my words, trying to get the accommodation in place before it's needed, or it may never even be needed if the development for the stables and whatever facilities needed for the horses is put in place. So I agree with Fraser, Chair. I don't think this is appropriate.
Thank you, Councillor McLaughlin. Is there any further questions or comments? If there are no further questions or comments, then I will move the recommendation, that is to refuse.
I'll second it, Chair.
Councillor Alec Allison.
No, sorry, I'll move that we grant. I believe it will be a useful addition to businesses in the rural area, and I leave it at that.
Sorry, can you just repeat the last part of that, Councillor Alison? The grounds?
To businesses in the rural area.
Yeah, that it would be an additional resource for the rural area.
And do we have a seconder, Councillor Allison? Councillor David Watson?
No, I want to maybe get some clarification, if that's all right.
Okay, can I bring in Councillor Ross Lambie first, and then I'll come back to you, Councillor
Right,
Watson. Councillor Ross Lambie, please.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I'll second Councillor Allison's amendment. I'd also just like to ask a question. Which part of policy, MPF policy 17, is this application falling foul of? Just bearing in mind the successful appeal, which we'll discuss later on in the committee today. Thanks.
Thank you. I'll ask Fraser just to come in on that, and then I'll come back to Councillor Watson. Thank you.
Yeah, no, in terms of the sporadic development, it's a development that's not located to an existing settlement, and it's rural housing that doesn't comply with national and local development plan policy.
Councillor David Watson, please.
Thanks, Chair. Am I right, Fraser, in saying I think that I saw a statement in, and I can't put my finger on it, in the report about if the property is a standalone property, with basically a bed and breakfast that wouldn't comply with our current policies, it wouldn't, be one that you would seek approval for. The issue being here that the property being built and arguing that, it could be a bed and breakfast is not a viable business, well, is not a viable reason in our current planning policy. Whereas if it was built in tandem, would it be comply with policy as a business, a viable business?
No, the issue we have here, is the application has been submitted for the residential property, as well as with the stables for the equine overnight. So the two propose a planning application for the bed and breakfast accommodation, just that standalone in terms of a residential unit, would be contrary to policy. And the actual use that's established here of stables, that would be appropriate in terms of an existing barn, an existing facility. It could be located within an existing farm complex and the like as well. It's the two uses together. Effectively, that is a business that doesn't have a specific locational need, and the viability of that business has not been proven because there is nothing there. It's a field just now, so we don't actually have any viable business that's operating there. And the difficulty moving forward around this, there's no control that the planning authority could have on this, and if that business as a stable fails, there's a house that's located on that site there that has effectively, to some extent, circumvented our policies in regard to residential development within the countryside and rural area.
Councillor Watson.
Yeah, thanks. I think that's what I was trying to say, but probably not very well. Is it a case that could we put a condition on that the house can only be occupied if the business is operational? Is that reasonable? No, sorry.
Sorry, Fraser.
It's not a matter that we could control as the business proves to be unviable. I think if we have a viable business here and that requires someone to stay on site in order to prove it, we have got a speculative proposal for a site that sits within a rural location. Having that control beyond it would be very difficult for the planning authority out now, and I think that's why in this instance here we just feel as if it's not appropriate, it's not acceptable in terms of our existing policy. So, and I don't think that's a control that we could necessarily enforce moving forward.
Councillor John Ross, if you want to indicate now if you wish to speak, I'll take Councillor John Ross and then Councillor Ross Lambie.
Yes, thanks very much, Chair. I can understand planning here and the thoughts have been left with if the business didn't come to fruition, been left with something that's negated our compliance regulations. I just don't see why the person can just not resubmit looking at the business end of it first. And then if it is a viable business, then apply for accommodation that can be used to satisfy that business. I think that's the best way to safeguard our planning regulations. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Councillor Ross. I'll come in, Councillor Ross Lambie.
Thanks, Chair. Just a quick one going back to NPF Policy 17. Item 5 on it suggests that that it's acceptable if it's demonstrated to be necessary to support a sustainable rural business and there's an essential need for a worker to live permanently or near the place of work. So it's essentially a horse hotel, isn't it, in my mind? And I can imagine if you're traveling for shows or other, agricultural parts of the horse industry, then you do need to stay near your asset. They're very expensive animals and need to be looked after. And you can imagine if they're traveling long distances, you do need to be on hand. So it's kind of stymieing a rural business in my mind. So I think it shouldn't say it's contravening policy 17 on the report. It should say it's actually in alignment with it, as far as I can see. And I'm minded that I think there is a way of wording a condition, such as, for example, if the horse business ceases trading, then the residential aspect of it also has to cease functioning. There must be some kind of condition that we can add, which this gives that a bit of assurance. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Lambie. I think just before we go to the vote, I'll ask Stuart just to confirm what we have as the motion and the amendment, and they would need to drop the conditions that would be attached to this. So I'll ask Stuart just to come in and clarify.
Should do. So, Councillor Allison, just before a recap on this, can I just clarify if you would be happy that the amendment would be subject to appropriate conditions being prepared by officers? Thank you. Councillor Lambie, are you happy with that as well as a seconder?
Yes, thanks.
Thank you. Okay, so just to recap, the motion is that the application be refused for the reasons detailed in the report, which has been proposed by Councillor Nelson and seconded by Councillor Convery. The amendment is that planning permission be granted on the grounds that the development would be an additional resource for the rural area and would be subject to appropriate conditions being prepared by officers. The vote is now open, and I would ask that members please indicate your choice. People, I should say. It would appear that a member is still to vote. I would ask that you please check your screen to ensure that your vote is registered, and if required, please select your choice again. Yep. All members present have now voted, and the vote is being closed. Nine members have voted in favour of the motion and 10 members have voted in favour of the amendment. I therefore declare the amendment carried. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Therefore, that will be passed, subject to the conditions being drawn up by officers. Thank you. We will then move to agenda item number 7, please. Agenda item number 7 is application P240010. That is pages 67 to 78 in your pack. It's erection of 5 detached dwelling houses, formation of vehicle access, parking and associated works. Land 75 metre west of the Mans and Stonehouse. Fraser.
Thanks, Chair. This application relates to a site that sits within the Greenbelt, out with the settlement boundary of Stonehouse, and seeks consent for the erection of 5 detached dwellings. The proposals that are included within this application were refused planning permission under delegated powers in January 2023, and the current scheme has now received 6 letters of objection, and it is also noted that the Council's Roads Service had objected to the proposals. As with the previous refusal, the application has been assessed against the development plan. It is clear that the proposals do not comply with the relevant Greenbelt policies, and that there are practical considerations in relation to drainage and access that lead to the recommendation for refusal. The reasons for refusal are set out in section 11 of the report that is presented to members today.
Thank you, Fraser. I'll open up for any questions or comments, please. If there are no questions or comments, I will recommend that we refuse this planning application.
I'll second it.
All agreed? Agreed, thank you. We'll move on to agenda item number 8, it's application P240019. That is pages 79 to 90 in your pack. This is a substitution of house types, erection of 182 dwelling houses with associated roads, drainage, landscaping and open space. And that's in Mansbury and Cambuslang.
Thanks, Chair. This application relates to a site that's within the Newton Community Growth Area, and as a result of a change in ownership, the applicant is now seeking to amend an application previously approved and seeks permission for a development of 182 dwellings. Access arrangements are as per the previous consent, and while 3 letters of objection were submitted, there are no changes to the scheme that would amend the recommendation for approval that was previously granted. As such, subject to the conditions on pages 84 to 88, it is recommended that planning permission should be approved.
Thank you, Fraser. Open up for any questions or comments. Councillor Thompson.
Chair, just an observation. I know in the past one of our councillors and colleagues for that area has mentioned infrastructure. Are we very well aware of that, like bus routes, schools, etc.? If so, I think that's a good idea, new housing there. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Thompson. That's all been taken into consideration, and I will ask that Fraser just backs that up. Are you okay with that, Fraser? Okay, yep. Any other further questions or comments? If there's no further questions or comments, it gives me great pleasure to recommend that we grant this subject to conditions.
I'll second it.
All agreed? Agreed, thank you. Agenda item number 9, application P240076. That is pages 91 to 102. And this is erection of 126 dwelling houses, associated infrastructure and landscaping, East Kilbride Community Growth Area, New House Road, East Kilbride. Fraser?
Thanks, Chair. This relates to a site within the East Kilbride Community Growth Area and seeks to approve conditions that were specified in the planning permission EK 09218. The application is the third phase of the Cala element of the community growth area and relates, as you say, to 126 dwellings and associated infrastructure. 4 letters of objection were submitted against the proposals, but in assessing the application, it is noted that the principle of development on the site is supported and that the details of the scheme are in keeping with the overall master plan for the community growth area. As such, subject to conditions in section 11 and the reasons set out in section 12, it is recommended that this application should be approved.
Thank you, Fraser. I'll open up for any questions or comments. Councillor David Watson, please.
Thanks, Chair. It's more comment and maybe some of the conditions and how important it is that they're actually adhered to. There's a history in this whole community development area where some of the developers have paid lip service to conditions, and the one I'm looking at the moment is in condition to protection of trees, etc. And we need to rigorously enforce these type of conditions on developers, because they just come in with their bulldozers and destroy what's meant to be kept. So basically I'm looking for some assurances that we'll be rigorously in making them aware of their responsibilities, and also their responsibilities in the hours of working. Again, this site, like a site previously, borders on existing residential areas, and time and time again I've had to get enforcement out to talk to the developers about their hours of working and their lack of respect for neighbouring properties. So again, I would be asking that that's made plain to the applicant in this case, that they need to respect the neighbouring properties. Finally, and I've raised this again, and I know the answer, but it's important, I think, that I raise it. This is another 100-odd houses in the community growth area. We talk about active travel, and I don't see any spades in the ground regarding active travel from the community growth area into the main area that links up towards Eaglesham Road, up to the train station, and hopefully what will be the bus interchange, and connecting it with the main body of East Kilbride. the answer usually comes that there's development money there for it as part of the plan once it's released. But we're getting more and more houses out there, and we really need to see improvements on Eaglesham Road sooner rather than later, with the more houses that get built out in the Jackton and community growth area. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. I think you're totally right. I think that's something that we spoke about when we came into this administration in regards to the enforcement and how we take that forward. I think Fraser and the team are taking that seriously going forward, and it's certainly something that had been raised previously before about enforcement. I think we do have to be stronger, and I'm sure Fraser will take those points on board and those conditions, and with the local members feeding back into them, I think that would be most helpful. I'm unsure if Fraser wants to come in there, that's fine. And I'm going to ask Fraser just to come in on the active travel side of things, just to give us an update on the active travel.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, it was just to clarify, there are designs that are currently being worked on for crossings at Eaglesham Road, Councillor. But it's also just worth highlighting that this particular phase of the development is actually relatively close to Greenhills Road, and through the Bellway development that's currently being constructed. There will be a link out to the bus stops on Greenhills Road as well. So work is ongoing.
Supplementary, Councillor Watson.
Sorry, I think the main issue is actually the safety, going from, if you were walking or cycling from the community growth area right up to the Greenhills Road and past it onto the hospital and the train station. And I say, keep hearing, yeah, there's plans for it, but we never see the spades on the ground.
Thank you, Councillor Watson. We'll keep those updated to you as well, and I'm sure that you as a local member can raise them with the appropriate officers at the right time to keep that going forward. Councillor Mary Donnelly. Councillor Donnelly, we can't hear you. I can see you, but we can't hear you. Still can't hear you, Councillor Donnelly. Is there any further questions or comments? Okay, if there's no further questions or comments, I will then grant subject to the conditions.
I'll second it, Chair.
All agreed? Agreed, thank you. We'll go to agenda item number 10, please, and that's the proposed stopping up of public road at 4 Redwood Crescent, East Kilbride. These are pages 103 to 106. And Fraser, please.
Yeah, this one is relates to a planning application that was actually approved under delegated powers, but it requires a stopping up order to be promoted that will allow access to the proposed development as well as maintain the existing access to the businesses that already operate in that area. It's considered that there are no negative impact with this amendment to the road, and the works will be carried out by the developer to the satisfaction of the local authority, and as such it is recommended that the committee authorises officers to undertake the relevant processes to promote this stopping up order.
Thank you, Fraser. Any questions or comments? No questions or comments. I will then propose this.
I'll second it.
All agreed? Agreed, thank you. Item number 11 is the planning appeal decisions from November 2023 to March 2024. These are pages 107 to 110, and that's to advise the committee of the decisions that have been issued by the Scottish Government Department of Planning. I will ask Fraser to talk through this paper for noting. Thank you, Fraser.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. This is for members just to note, and it is the second update on decisions that have been made by the Scottish Government on appeals submitted against decisions made by the Planning Committee. As I said, this information is provided purely as an update to members. but it is noted that the decision of the committee has been supported by the Scottish Government's Reporters Unit in all but one of the planning applications that were appealed during 23-24. Links have been attached to the report to allow members an opportunity to review the decisions and the observations from the reporters appointed by the Scottish ministers. As writing this report, there was actually one appeal that was outstanding, but 15 minutes before today's meeting, we actually got a decision from the DPA recommended that the one outstanding appeal has been dismissed as well. This will be reported to the committee in the autumn, but as I say, this information is just provided to members in terms of the decisions that have been made.
Thank you, Fraser. As this is an item for note, I wasn't planning to take any questions. I think just for openness and transparency, I think we'll allow some questions. If you indicate now, I don't want this to drag on, because it is just an item for noting for people just to see what the planning officers are actually doing. So we'll go through them in the order they appear on screen. So Councillor Ross Lambie, please.
Thank you, Chair. Just picking up on the successful appeal against our decision. It's quite an interesting interpretation from the reporter, and I'll read it out fairly quickly because I know that it's not included within the papers. So it states that the Council took the view that NPF Policy 4, NPF 4 Policy 17 rural homes was incompatible with our Greenbelt policies, and therefore no exceptions can be provided, and we couldn't use any of our current Greenbelt local development plan policies in determining applications. Instead, we've been relying on NPF 4 Policy 17 to say, look, you have to comply with these exceptions or you can't build outside a settlement boundary. Now, the reporter basically says that's not true, and the reporter states that those lists of exceptions that you can build in the countryside, they are additional alternatives. Alternative additionals is what it says in the reporter's report. So therefore, my reading of this is that it basically inverts our entire position on this, and that all of our current Greenbelt local development plan policies are now once again active and they're acceptable. Just in addition, the reporter also picks up the definition of brownfield sites. Now, recent applications, we've been taking quite a hard line view on what brownfield is. For example, if it was previous hardcore yards and weeds were growing through it, that was deemed to be a site in the process of regreening. However, the reporter takes a far, far less hardline view of it. And in fact, this particular application, a site which has had some disturbance, unproven exactly what its extent of previous use was, currently being used for horse grazing, the reporter found it underfoot to be of limited environmental benefit, and therefore he actually deemed it to be brownfield. So those two things combined I think are quite a seismic change in how we need to determine applications in the wider countryside. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Lambie. Those are noted. Councillor Watson, please.
Probably much in the same guise, but from an opposite point of view of the points raised by Councillor Lambie there. Reading this, we've got into a situation with MPF 4 that with little guidelines and left a lot to the interpretation of our planning officers, and I think the results coming back are indicative of the views taken by our officers, and I would commend them for the lead that they're showing us on this at the moment, and it seems to be, and don't necessarily always agree with it, but it seems to be in tow with the guidelines that we're being asked to follow by the Scottish Government, and the interpretation that we're getting should give us a bit of a confidence in the papers that come forward with comment against MPF 4. It's never going to always be right. We're never always going to agree with it, but I think it's a good starting point. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Watson. Councillor Callison, please.
Yeah, I was following on really from Councillor Lambie to ask what, if any, changes we'll be making, because I do believe there are other applications in the pipeline that are similar to the one that was overturned by the reporter. Now, I accept that everything is judged on its own merits, but if they're suggesting slightly different criteria to what we're using, are we going to reassess some of those that that would fall into this category?
Thank you, Councillor Alison. As this item is just for noting, I would ask that you take that offline and take that up with the planning officer directly.
Okay.
Councillor Mary Donnelly, please.
Out, Chair, why I wasn't getting volume. So can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Just to welcome planning appeals decision on the agenda. I think it's good that we're getting the feedback from the Scottish Government and we can see going forward. So I just welcome that item on this agenda.
Thank you, Councillor Donnelly. I personally would like to thank Fraser and the planning team and the planning department here for their continued work. I think the 1 out of the 13 shows that we are actually implementing the policies correctly and appropriately. And I think that work shows in this paper that comes here. I think adding to that is we didn't ask for MPF4. MPF4 was imposed on us by the Scottish Government overnight, and it's something that the team had to adapt to very, very rapidly and quickly. And I think their interpretation of that is actually going well within, and I know that people don't agree with everything that we say, but I do think that that's welcomed. I don't have any items of urgent business on agenda item number 12. I therefore close today's meeting and thank you all for attendance.
Thank you.